on his way. Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker. The devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Motherfucker, he's on his
Hi, y'all. Welcome back to Mountain Murders. I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
How are you, Dylan?
I am doing good.
Always say that.
Yes.
Can we work on your English?
You can work on it all you want, but you're still going to get the same end result.
You told me maybe last night, you were like, I'm bilingual. I speak American English and Appalachian English.
That's right.
I understand.
We were watching a rather interesting movie called Spell.
Yeah, it was a horror film.
It was a horror film, and the premise is you have this family, which happens to be a black family. He's returning to Appalachia in honor of his father or something to that effect, and actually ends up in the grips. Oh,
Yeah, in the grips, baby.
in the grips of a Appalachian witch.
Yeah,
who's
so there's like some folk magic.
Yeah, so they're
little
working
bit
with like
of
a hoodoo.
and root work.
And what I thought was very interesting is all the characters in the movie were black. Because guess what? There are black people in Appalachia.
I loved it.
And it was well done. And it was pretty creepy.
It was creepy.
At times, I found myself just, afraid of what was going to happen next. So I highly recommend the movie Spell. And it's very good.
It gave me Jordan Peele vibes.
Yes,
The creepiness with the hoodoo, root work.
Definitely Jordan Peele vibes there. And dare I say, maybe a scarier movie than he's put forth so far.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty well done. I'm not sure what channel you were streaming that, Dylan, but highly recommend if you're looking for a good horror film. I watched the release of Netflix's Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
One right quick, that was on Epix. You
Okay.
can find Spell there. And let's talk about the fact that Heather watched a new installment of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that dropped at home where we could snuggle together and watch it. She watched it without me.
I know. Well, look, I'm a big Texas Chainsaw Massacre fan. Okay,
Me
that is
too.
my favorite horror film, like ever. You don't even
And?
have a favorite.
I can't. There's so many good ones. I can't pick a
See,
favorite.
and I have committed, Dylan, to my relationship with Leatherface. Of course, I had to watch. I couldn't wait. There was no dilly-dallying waiting on Dylan.
Let's not be coy here in this situation because we know damn well you will run off and leave me on a series when we find a good series together. And I am pointing my finger at you right now.
You do the same thing. We were rewatching Game of Thrones not too long ago, and you jumped ahead like 3 seasons ahead of me. So don't give me shit.
So if anyone else out there listening has this issue with their husband or wife or their partner, whomever they may be, was that the King's English?
Yes.
Just tell them to cut that shit out because what it really proves is they do not care about you in the least.
It took that. Gosh.
Well, besides
and I've been trying to be super obvious by saying, I hate you. I want to live in a 1-bedroom apartment away from you.
Besides you stating that every day, I mean, I had no clue this was happening.
Yeah.
And now I know. I know where we stand.
Well, it's really just because I'm tired of cleaning up after you.
So, anywho, yeah.
Well, I'm going to say, now there's been a lot of hate with this new Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. I've been following the Twitters.
I hadn't seen it.
So many people like this movie's trash. I understand, but it's not my favorite. It's definitely not the worst in the franchise.
I can't comment.
There are a few good kill scenes.
I haven't seen the movie, so I have no idea what you're talking about.
So you're not even in the club.
So, yeah. So why am I even
You're
here?
excluded.
Okay, I have to stop everything right here. I must thank today's sponsors of Mountain Murders.
Yes, you do.
Yes, I would like to thank Katie and Dixie for donating so generously over at patreon.com/whatever.
Yeah, we just went through this bout of like 3 weeks of electrical issues in our house. All weekend we've been battling plumbing issues. We need more patrons so we can afford to not live in this shitty house. No, I'm just kidding. but it's true.
Yes. Well, no, we could always use more patrons. Of course, we love the ones we have, the ones we will gain in the future. And thank you, Katie. Thank you, Dixie, for sponsoring us there, and everyone else that does. And let's carry on.
I'm ready to get into the case we have for this week. It is so juicy, and it's such an Appalachian story, Dylan.
This is a wonderful, interesting story. Of course, there is accusations of murder and such in it, which, but this is a great story. It's very interesting, and I think it will give some people a glimpse into maybe the darker side of Appalachia. Appalachia? How'd I say it? The mountains.
I'm about to throw an Appalachia, okay? It is not Appalachia. And if you say that
in your presence,
you ain't from here.
That's right.
All right? You're an outlander, you're a carpetbagger. And yeah.
Now I must say I'm doing a fence for a guy who just moved into the area from Dallas.
Do you scream at him? Or you're like, Outlander! I would.
Did in my head. But anyway, he's a great guy. But he's just like, you said you'd be here in a bit, and I wasn't sure how long that was. I was like, well, yeah, I forgot you just moved into the area and you're not familiar with the how long a bit is. And a bit is basically, I'll be there in a bit, is when I get there, I'll be there. But I can't tell you exactly when I'm going.
I'll either show up or I won't.
And he's like, I got to get used to you mountain folk. I said, well, you might want to start by not calling us mountain folk. Okay, bud?
Yeah.
I didn't tell him that. He's paying my bills. I was like, oh, yeah, you sure do, sir.
Skin that boy alive. Okay.
It's a great guy.
Now, warning, I want to go ahead and put this out there. The story does contain issues such as domestic violence, suicide, child abuse, so discretion advised if you have problems with those subjects.
Yes, if you have problems with those subjects, just click on another great episode of Mountain Murders and don't listen to this one.
Are you ready, Dylan?
Yeah, let's go.
The origins of serpent handling lie in the old folk traditions of the Appalachian Mountains. Snake handling was introduced as a ritual practice, allegedly brought to the spotlight around 1910 or so when a traveling preacher named George Hensley began including it in his sermons. Now, Dylan, have you ever been to a snake handling church?
I know for a fact I have told people about my experience with this on Mountain Murders.
Well,
more than once.
Refresh our memories.
Yes, my mom, I would go on the little bus to different various churches, right? My mom would meet with the people. Cool, they seem nice. I mean, you know how that goes. But, so I tried a bunch of different churches growing up.
So it was like a way for your mama to get your ass out of the house so she didn't have to deal with you for a couple hours. You could go be schooled about the Lord, maybe get a cookie, and come home.
Yes, I do believe my mom was getting some me time in a very
Don't blame
great
her.
way. So I tried all these different churches. Anyway, so went to one, and it was different because instead of like a church van, it's like a dude just swings around and gets you in his pickup truck.
Okay.
With his slap full of kids in the back.
Nice.
Okay.
Very safe.
And anyway, we go to there, and they did not handle the snakes, but they brought them out, and they were there, and they were doing some pretty heavy Pentecostal stuff. They were getting the Holy Spirit all the way up in them. And, yeah. And I went home and told my mom, hey, they were doing this. There were snakes. And she was like, oh, my God. And I was like, oh, damn, Mom, maybe you should vet these churches a little bit better. I don't know what to say. At least it was only snakes, right?
Now, was this while you were living in North Carolina or Tennessee?
This would be in the mountains of Tennessee.
In East Tennessee.
Yes.
Okay, so snake handlers were alive and well circa, what, the mid-'80s in East Tennessee.
Yes, mid-'80s.
There you go.
There you go.
All right. Very Appalachian story we got for you today, folks. For textual justification, George Hensley pointed to the verse Mark 16 through 18. In my name shall they cast out devils. They shall speak with new tongues. They shall take up serpents. And if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them.
Wow.
So they are literally translating this scripture to mean, you know, this is a direct command from the Lord that we need to take up venomous snakes. Yeah,
and I guess a lot of branches of religion do this. You know, they take their own part of the text, they literally translate it and interpret it, and go by word for word what it says, which I find interesting that you find these huge differences amongst churches and beliefs, but they all basically do the same thing, but they're just picking different passages.
So that's your simplified explanation of denominations.
That's what they call them.
Okay. Well, Dylan, non-venomous snakes are not considered to be serpents.
Well, no.
Did you know that?
They're constrictors.
They are?
Yep. Serpents and vipers tend to have a spoon-shaped head.
For a time, a number of folks agreed with this ideology. Appalachia was experiencing the Great Revival, which was a wave of holiness and Pentecostal evangelizing that swept across the countryside. This style of worship was more theatrical. The worshipers found the Spirit of God moving freely among themselves. Practitioners were compelled by the power of the Holy Spirit to speak in tongues, cast out demons, heal with their hands, and that faith must be powerfully experiential.
Yeah, so anytime you hear a term like lay their hands upon someone to heal them, or any of the things Heather described, it comes back to these fairly, should I say, rare branches? I mean, wouldn't you say these typically are small groups, small churches?
Do you mean the folks? I mean, because there's a lot of people out there who are followers of the Pentecostal denomination, right? Now, as far as the snake handlers, is that what you mean? Now, that is few and far between, especially today.
Okay.
And we'll get more into that. Now, they believe they received the Holy Spirit from God. Any man could preach if he felt the Spirit. One didn't need a formal, theological education to serve. You didn't have to go to seminary. Any person off the street who felt the calling could just, grab a mic, get up at the pulpit, and, let the Holy Spirit kind of flow through them.
So basically, God can speak through anyone. If you feel that's what's happening, let us all, enjoy it with you.
Yes, and serpent handling was a spectacle. It drew crowds of onlookers, some judging the practice, while others felt the charismatic call to become part of this exciting religious movement. Like any trend, it spread like wildfire with more churches popping up. The snakes themselves were transformed by God in faith. No longer was it an evil, slithering thing wrapping around your wrist, but it was tamed by faith.
Yeah, well, the snakes always had this very strong, part it's played in religion, this symbol. And so it's very, I guess it would be rather exciting or something to see someone almost take the snake and now it's not dangerous. And as far as the symbolism goes in religion, it's almost like you're controlling the devil or the bad things.
And this is a side note, but when we speak about this, this very fiery evangelical type of religion sort of spreading like wildfire throughout the South, we visited a place over in Murphy, North Carolina called Field of the Woods that was a really big part of this religious movement. This fella built this area. There's a huge 10 Commandments.
It's the biggest 10 Commandments around.
Yeah, they have a baptismal pool. They have
Jesus's tomb.
The tomb, a replica. I mean, it's a very interesting park, right? It's free. Go spend the day. But it has a unique history that is rooted in this spread at the turn of the century. So back to our story. By 1955, there had been at least 35 confirmed deaths due to this new practice of snake handling. One of them was a 75-year-old Hensley, the gentleman who kind of sparked this movement. He was killed by a 5-foot rattlesnake in Florida.
Oh, my God.
Now, by then, the Holiness and Pentecostal assemblages had washed their hands of this practice. Most Appalachian states have banned it. It is illegal to practice serpent handling, with the exception of West Virginia.
So it's almost like the Mormons and the multiple wives and some of the older traditions they have there is you have these people who do this, have this very literal translation of certain parts of the Bible, but then the mainstream, that's even too much for them. So they're trying to distance themselves. Well, we're Pentecostal, but we're not snake handlers, right?
Now, there are a few remaining serpent handling churches operating in the backwoods of Appalachia, many of them operating in secret. They have kind of created their own ways. Each church differs from the next. For many in the religion, snake handlers not in the religion, but in this region, a lot of other Appalachian folk, mountain folk, find that the snake handlers are sort of perpetuating the stereotype. They are deemed kind of misguided, sometimes maybe a little kooky. And stories of Appalachian serpent handlers kind of has morphed into this mountain folklore. It's mocked by outsiders, but revered by a faithful few.
Well, yeah, I guess I could see. I mean, it's just kind of like the stereotypical ignorant, backwards, hillbilly, whatever, dumb, don't know anything. You're stuck in the old ways, blah blah blah. So I could see some people feeling like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole, I guess, movement of, we call ourselves y'alternative folks, and we're like the y'alternative Appalachian folks. And so, yeah, some of the old ways maybe don't quite make sense to us.
Y'alternative?
The y'alternatives.
Gosh, can we copyright that?
Like, we have no hate in our holler, folks, Dylan.
We don't have any hate in our holler.
No.
We love everybody.
Nope.
Even
no
if,
hate.
well, if somebody come up to you and was handling snakes, you'd be like, look, you can stay for soup, but you're going to have to put your snake away.
I do not care for snakes. Researching the story was a lot for me.
I know it was. I could tell
Okay.
just watching snake on TV was making you uncomfortable.
Yeah, I don't like them.
So I would never have to worry about Heather delving into this branch of religion.
No. But I'm so intrigued.
Well, just the pure blind faith of what these people are putting into this and doing is rather fascinating, I must say.
I think it's very fascinating. One of the reasons why we decided to cover this case. It's a funny story, Dylan. I found this book while we were on vacation in New Orleans. Okay.
Ooh.
Those little library corners that folks will set up on the street, maybe
Free
in front of a
books.
business, in front of their home, like a little library corner. Take a book, leave a book, take a book. I was walking to get coffee one morning. You guys were all asleep. A little cafe up the street in the Garden District. Happened to, cross paths with one of these little library corners or whatever. Found this book. I was like, this is perfect. I'm going to have my coffee. Found a weird book. Sit down, start reading. I was like, oh, we have got to talk about this on Mountain Murders, right?
That's what they call that damned old serendipity.
Serendipity?
Serendipity. I knew her.
It's serendipitous.
I went to 11th grade with her.
Yeah, I knew her too. Everybody said she was a hoe, but she was a nice girl.
But they already knew it,
just
and they
kidding.
said it just wasn't a coincidence either. It's going to happen.
I'm just kidding.
Wait.
If your name is Serendipity, I don't really know you.
If your name's
It's a joke.
Sharon,
Okay,
I think
okay.
Sharon's a great name.
So yeah, had to cover the story. Let's get into it, Dylan. Glendale Buford Summerford didn't begin life with religious aspirations. If anything, his story is quite opposite. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about Glenn's life leading up to our crime. Glenn was born in 1945 as the United States wrapped up World War II. Life on the home front had been tough, but it wasn't much different for most rural Americans who lived hand to mouth. Glenn's parents were of Cherokee ancestry. His mother, Annie Smith, married his father, her second husband, but this relationship did not last. Glenn never knew his biological father until he was a teenager. Annie's first husband had gotten custody of their daughter, so Annie was deeply paranoid that Glenn's father would do the same with her son. The pair spent the early part of Glenn's life living as nomads. They moved across the South, hoping to evade any contact with Glenn's biological father.
Well, and that's a hard way to be brought up. So she lost custody, her first husband.
Her first child.
First child.
Yes.
And so she was, at all cost, going to keep this child with her,
Yes.
even if it meant moving frequently and often and all that. Which, I mean, just it makes for a tough household.
Money was tight. Times were hard. So a few times during his childhood, Annie gave Glenn away to hide him, but also because she could barely afford to take care of him. This created feelings of abandonment in Glenn early on. Glenn felt like he had to sort of take a back seat to all the other problems in his mother's life. I think there are a few of us out there who had very tumultuous childhoods, right?
Oh, really?
Dysfunctional parents.
Doesn't everybody grow up perfect?
And as children, you do feel like you take a back seat to their issues, right? And it does like leave a mark on you, your personality.
Well, sure it does. And some people, it makes them very outgoing, wanting to entertain everyone around them. And some other people, it makes them withdrawn, and more of an introvert. But I think it definitely leaves a mark on your personality.
They were poor, so he only ever got hand-me-downs, and Christmas rarely came. Annie was also temperamental, and according to Glenn's account, she would hit him with anything that she happened to grab with her hand. A shoe, a hairbrush, a wooden spoon, it didn't matter.
Well, I was going to say, for her first child to be in the custody of the father in this day and age back then, I'm going to guess that she had some type of issues or had some problems that she was working through, because it would be hard to get custody from a mother, right?
I think at that time, yes, Dylan, but I also think money made a big difference.
Well, that's true today.
If you could afford the right attorney as a father, you could easily say she can't provide for this child and take the kid.
Well, I mean, that's the way it works even through today. If they have an attorney, you don't. They have a good attorney, you have a crappy one, or the one you could afford, or is just not experienced. Typically, you will lose. So that's a good point.
Well, Glenn learned to walk on eggshells. He became very quiet, introverted, and was socially awkward with other kids his age. A loner, Glenn had a hard time making friends, and most of the kids bullied him for being very quiet. By 1952, when Glenn was 7 years old, Annie married William Mance. Willie was a war hero who'd served in the Special Forces during World War II. He spent 36 months overseas. Glenn was incredibly happy to finally have a daddy, and though Mance had 5 other kids, he took a shine to young Glenn. Willie could see that Glenn was struggling. He was being bullied and beaten up fairly often by the other kids, including his cousins. And I should mention, this is like a big, old, like Southern-style family where everybody kind of lives around each other. And so Glenn grew up with his cousins.
So as far as the kids he played with in the neighborhood were his cousins?
They were relatives.
Or family, friends, where the families have known each other for a long time?
Yes, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So Willie offered to teach his stepson how to defend himself. When he was a few years older, Willie took Glenn fishing. Once they were down by the creek where a log crossed over the water, Willie took Glenn out and told him, you need to go out in the middle of this log. Willie then bumped it a few times, causing Glenn to topple over into the cold creek. First lesson was a need for balance.
Oh my God, this is like an 80s kung fu movie.
I know, I need a montage.
Dude, this is awesome.
Between teaching Glenn how to protect himself with fists, he also taught his stepson how to swim. Glenn would later say Willie was his best friend, and he knew he was the favorite child despite being a stepson. Willie and Glenn were inseparable. Willie was the first male role model in Glenn's life. So they're palling around. They're swimming, they're fishing.
Learning how to kill people with your pinky finger?
Yeah. Doing some MacGyver moves.
And his stepfather was special forces, right?
Yes.
He was like a badass.
Right. And Glenn knew he'd been in the military, but in the book, that was one of my main resources, which I'll give you at the end of the story, he mentioned that, he was not really aware of his stepfather's actions in the war.
Because he didn't sit around talking about it.
Right. He never really spoke about his time overseas, but Glenn found Purple Hearts. He was injured and really saw some action. Education wasn't a top priority for the family, so Glenn would often skip school to help his stepdad work construction and do other odd jobs. During Glenn's early teenage years, the family relocated to Chicago. Now, what a culture shock to move from Alabama to Chicago.
Well, yeah, I'm sure that was a rather hard change to make.
Which I'm not sure if I'd mentioned, but our story is mostly taking place in Alabama. But yeah, I'm what a culture shock to go from the backwoods Alabama to Chicago. So by now, Glenn has totally dropped out of school to focus on his passion, which is fighting. Glenn was an excellent fighter. He started participating in underground boxing matches, often taking home the prize money. Glenn's cousin was associated with some gangsters who ran the illegal fights in warehouses. Well, you know, Glenn, the first rule of Fight Club is we don't talk about Fight Club.
Glenn's just whooping ass.
Though Glenn aspired to be a professional boxer, he lacked the financial resources to hire a coach or train full-time. It was also around this time, so Glenn's about 15 when this happens. He learns his biological father is also living in Illinois.
Oh, wow.
He arranged a meeting with his father and discovered he wasn't the mean man Glenn expected because he spent his whole life running from this man. So he doesn't really know what his father is like. Just stories he's heard from his mother, and he knows they were on the run from him for a long time.
Well, I saw this thing the other day that it describes that perfectly. Sometimes you grow up thinking you have some deadbeat, distant parent, when it turns out the parent you've stayed with, it was their issues or their problems that were keeping you from the other person, or their bitterness or resentment.
Instead, Glenn's father gave him a warm welcome, introduced him to all the relatives, and actually wanted his son to live with him. Glenn had different plans, though. He wanted to pursue a boxing career. Glenn's father was a happy, generous man who offered to buy his son a bus ticket to Florida, where Glenn planned to seek out his fighting future. His father also deposited money into a bank account for him, but Glenn said he never went back to collect those funds. Glenn believed in earning his own way. Glenn moved back and forth between Chicago and Florida for a while, setting up fights along the way in Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. Glenn made a lot of connections, networking the fight circuit. He even won a brand new 1956 Ford at one of the Chicago matches.
Oh my God. So he's just whooping ass in underground fighting rings.
Yeah.
I mean, how metal is that?
Kind of reminds me of Buford Pusser when
Yeah.
we covered Buford Pusser because he was a wrestler,
Yeah.
right? Around the same time.
Yeah, wasn't he called the Bull or something?
I think so.
He was a big guy.
Glenn would earn about $150, sometimes up to $300 per fight, which was more than enough money for a young man at this time. By 1961, Glenn had sustained a cracked rib. He was able to briefly train with a coach in Chicago, where he defeated 30 opponents.
Oh my God. In boxing?
In boxing.
Wow.
By the time Glenn was 18 in 1963, he's only like 16, beating the shit out of these other opponents. Can you imagine?
No, and it sounds like because he's fought all his life, and he learned early on. He had some good training about having a good base and balance and all that. I could see all that translating over to bare knuckle fighting or boxing.
So it is in 1963, when he's 18, Dylan, that he participates in a mafia-arranged tournament, and it had this winner-takes-all cash prize. Glenn won 3 rounds and took this pocket full of money, but the other fighters were upset because here's this young punk. Who the fuck are you coming in, winning this money? A fight ensues, a big brawl, and during the fight, Glenn took a beating, and someone cracked his skull. He was robbed of the money. With a serious head injury, Glenn was hospitalized and told by doctors, you have to stop fighting. But Glenn did not listen.
Oh my God, this is like a movie.
He didn't have any means of earning that kind of living that he had with boxing. Like any other job, he knew he was just making beans compared to, $150, $300 a night.
Well, he's making this fast money. He's whooping ass. He's feeling like a man. He's young.
Young buck.
I sometimes forget how young he was going through all this stuff. But it's like it's a win-win for him in his mind. He feels like a man. He's kicking ass. He's making big money, and you don't have to work some crappy 9-to-5 job all week long. He can just go whoop somebody's butt for a couple of nights a week and have plenty of money.
Around this time, Glenn began dating Doris Holcomb, who lived in Scottsboro, Alabama. Now, after a short courtship, the pair got married. Glenn was running moonshine while they were dating, which Doris was unaware of this. The pair had actually gone to school together as children, but Doris didn't particularly like the rough and tumble Glenn. In first grade, Glenn had told Doris, I'm going to marry you.
Oh, wow.
And she was like, no, you're not. She described the boy as the red-headed, freckled-faced boy in her class.
Oh, and that's nothing like Glenn.
Nothing like Glenn. She did not like him. Doris's life had been much different from Glenn's growing up. She lived on a farm with a big, loving family. They didn't have money, but her family never went hungry. Doris's parents might punish certain offenses with a whooping, but it was nothing like the physical violence Glenn had seen, like out of his mother's tantrums growing up. The couple moved to Florida, where Glenn found work at a dairy farm, and soon after, Doris was pregnant with their first child. By all accounts, life was happy for the couple, though sometimes financially tense. During a fishing trip with some friends, Glenn broke into a home of a woman who was a known bootlegger.
Oh, wow.
They stole whiskey and a shotgun. Well, he ends up being charged with burglary and grand larceny. So while he's in jail, Doris has to move in with her parents back in Alabama. Their son, Eddie Ray, was born soon after Glenn went to jail. He ended up serving 9 months of an 18-month sentence, eventually ending up at a work camp, which was much better because then he could visit with his wife and newborn son.
Didn't you tell me, I just want to make this clear, that it was a lot less information available on Doris's childhood and background than, say, Glenn?
Yeah, I mean, we got a little bit about Doris, but it's actually going to be Glenn's second wife that we don't have a lot of information about. But we're going to get to that.
Okay.
Don't interrupt me, okay?
Okay.
Thanks.
To be clear,
Thanks.
I interrupted.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
You're
Anytime.
interrupting my story.
I'm interrupting you interrupting me, so you need to cut that shit out.
Glenn had seemingly given up on fighting after marrying Doris, but he couldn't stop thinking about the thrill of it all. You know, being in the ring, the chants, the crowd, you know, chanting his name.
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty big adrenaline, rush doing that.
Yeah, so he starts setting up fights behind Doris's back.
Oh, so now it's secret underground fights.
Yeah, not a good thing, right? You can't set up underground fights behind your wife's back.
That's going to be hard to hide.
Well, Dylan, during one of the fights, Glenn got punched in the lung, and he told Doris he got kicked by a cow because he's working at a dairy farm. For 2 weeks, he was gravely ill, but finally agreed to see a doctor. He was told his lung was punctured, filling with blood, and he only had 3 days to live.
Oh, my God.
His family gathers by his bedside, but Glenn is determined to live. Days turned into a week, and slowly Glenn begins healing up, which was like a miracle. Doctors were kind of marveling at how well he was healing up after this horrible injury. Glenn and Doris were living in Paint Rock, Alabama with their 4 children. Glenn worked for a logging company because they're kind of moving around, whatever. And he still hadn't forgotten about fighting. The excitement coursed through his veins. He wanted to make more money, so he arranged a few fights near Fackler, Alabama. Glenn had hopes of saving up money. He wanted to buy a commercial fishing boat, but there just never seemed to be enough money.
So when you go get beat up and you're having these secret fights, I guess before he would just be like, "Hey, I'm going to fight, going to work. I'll be back in a little while." How do you hide that? If you get hit and your lips are always busted, you're looking like the waiters and stuff in Fight Club, all beat up.
I'm gonna guess at this point, like, she's onto it. Doris is a smart woman.
Okay.
At age 27, Glenn is fighting in Gurley, Alabama, when he rubs a man the wrong way. And I don't mean that in a sexual way, Dylan. He calls the guy a coward. Probably something like, "You yeller-bellied skinflint."
Yeah, it
Right?
was exactly like that.
And made some remarks about the guy's family. Well, this did not go over well. Glenn knocked the guy out. He describes it as the guy's eyeball literally like pops out of his head.
Oh, yes. This description is he hit him, and it's like his eye popped completely out of his head.
Yeah. Well, when this man has awakened, very angry, he vows revenge against Glenn.
Well, damn, Jeb, he knocked your eye clean out. You sure you want to still mess with that old boy?
I'm out for blood.
Well, it looks like you're out for a new eye, too. I mean, you need to get somewhere and get still.
Yeah, I know. I want to know. I need to know more about the eye.
Was he blind?
I don't know
at
any
that
more
point,
information
or-
about the eye,
Yeah.
but did he get a glass eye? Were they able to, like, pop it back in? Like, what happened?
Oh, man. What if it's just a fully functioning eye, like dangling out onto your cheek? and you could like do cool party tricks with your eye.
You just carry it around in your hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, so yeah, well, I'm gonna assume that nothing good come of his eye being popped out of its socket.
No.
Like, so I'm sure it's gonna leave a mark of some
Can
kind.
I just say, on the record, I find eye patches kind of sexy.
Yeah, I could see that.
Especially chicks with eye patches, like Daryl Hannah in Kill Bill.
Oh yeah.
That's pretty hot.
No, but it's like the eye patch, especially a really groovy, cool one. It just gives you this element of danger.
Right.
You know what I mean? Even if you're the most passive, non-dangerous person in the world, slap an eye patch on, and all of a sudden people have questions. You have this mystery,
You're mysterious.
this mystique.
By now, Glenn's reputation as a boxer had earned him quite a few enemies because he's just kicking ass.
And I think that's why people are getting so mad at him is they can never settle it in the ring. They can't find somebody to whoop his ass. He's just kicking everybody's ass.
He was placing bets, winning fights, and folks were big mad. I mean, money was just flowing out into Glenn's hands.
They were big mad.
They were big mad.
That's worse
They
than
was big mad, Dylan. So big mad. In fact, we're about to talk about some retaliation.
So he would bet on himself and then go kick ass and not only win the purse, the prize money, but also win a bet on himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what do you do
It's
with
like
that?
Ricky Bobby. You take a bet on yourself and you sponsor by me,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Now, on a cool March evening in 1972, the Summerfords' home caught fire. Glenn was sleeping on the floor of his son's room when Junior, which I believe was like his older son, woke him up. Smoke was filling their mobile home. Glenn jumps into action, grabbing a television and tosses it through a window, which busts out the glass. He rushes to wake up Doris. The husband and wife run to get their children out of this burning house. It's now engulfed in flames because it's a trailer.
They go up like a tinderbox.
Doris would hand Glenn a child, and he was carefully trying to like shove them out the window. But, you know, I mean, it's up a bit and they're little kids, but he's trying to get them out of this fire. Doris was wearing like a long nylon style nightgown, which I'm imagining this is the 70s. So it's probably the kind of nightgowns my grandma used to wear. And it just caught fire. Like the nylon just went up
Oh my gosh.
in flames. Glenn tries to tear the gown off his wife, but it's melted to her skin. That's when he tosses Doris outside and then jumps out himself. Glenn had been working at a garage on that particular evening, so he was wearing like a double set of clothing. And he says that's probably the only thing that saved him because he was able to make it out without major burns.
Damn, Glenn went to bed in the work clothes.
I guess he was so tired he fell asleep on his kid's floor.
Well, that could happen. I understand that.
Glenn puts Doris in the car. He then starts counting the kids, and that's when he realizes his 18-month-old daughter, Sarah, is still inside the burning trailer.
Could you imagine the sinking feeling? You've already been through this traumatic event. Your home and all your belongings is going up in literal flames, and then realize that you don't have one of your children with you, and you know they were in the house.
And this was Glenn's only daughter at the time, his only baby girl. And they had a very special relationship, even though she was only 18 months old. This was like the apple of his eye. He loved this little girl. And hearing Glenn speak about his daughter was heartbreaking for me. By now, neighbors have seen this fire. When Glenn realizes his daughter's trapped inside, he tries to rush in, but his cousin, a guy named Bill Busby, who's showed up because, again, they kind of all live around each other, has to hold him down. And Bill is a big man. He's like 300 pounds, like a huge, stocky, like big dude. And it was like all he could do to keep Glenn from running into this fire. Sadly, Sarah did not survive. Glenn had a special relationship with his baby daughter, as I mentioned, and this tragic death nearly broke his spirit. In a state of panic, and let's be honest, shock, Glenn didn't have his car keys. He begins hot wiring the car. He was nearly to Scottsboro when an ambulance passed him. He was like on the way to the hospital. A police officer was following the ambulance and fire truck. Reportedly, Glenn was driving so fast to get his family to the hospital that the cop couldn't catch up with him.
So he hot-wired the car and took off towards the hospital with the rest of his family.
Yes.
Okay.
Like driving like hell. 3 days before the house fire, Doris's grandmother had passed away, and Glenn's half-sister had died in Texas a week before. So the family was hit with a third death, and this grieving period was tremendous. The family barely had enough money to pay for Sarah's funeral. Like, they had to scrape together money so they could bury their daughter.
Wow.
Really sad.
Yeah, all that death in a row like that, and then you throw the little one in, and his house is burned down, and that's just a lot for anyone to deal with.
It's a lot. Law enforcement investigated the incident as arson, and he really felt this was retaliation from this man that he had, beaten in this fight, had taken this money.
He was sure that someone had set their house on fire.
Yeah. But they didn't have any proof, so no one was charged. Glenn was convinced, as I said, it was retaliation for beating the man in the fight. Now, his stepfather warned him not to use a certain brand of mountain justice. He reminded Glenn, and this was something he always told Glenn, if you take a life, you can never give it back. You can never give life. So that was like kind of something Glenn grew up hearing and knowing, especially when it came to these fights. Like, don't take it too far because you can never bring someone back. With Doris in the hospital recovering from those burns, the family was hit with another dose of misfortune. His stepfather passed away, like soon after all of this happened. And Glenn was devastated. The man who had taught him everything was gone, and he was still just heartbroken over his daughter. With the loss of their baby girl, Glenn and Doris found their relationship irreparably damaged, and the marriage began to crumble. By 1974, Glenn and Doris separated. Glenn admittedly had a death wish. He had all but given up on living. He was reckless, and despite all of this, Glenn, he did feel love for Doris, but he was just felt like he couldn't be with her. But she always let him be a father to their children. So even though they're not together, Glenn is still, being a good dad. And Doris would later say that Glenn had been abusive at times in their relationship, but never toward the children. So he was, the kind of guy, he pushed her around, he would slap her around, he had a bad temper, but he was never mean to the kids, and he never put his hands on their kids.
And that certainly doesn't excuse those other behaviors.
Not at
But
all.
I guess she's pointing out it was never directed towards the children. He always loved the kids.
Yeah.
Okay.
So she's saying, he might have been a piece of shit husband, but he was a good father. And Glenn felt his life was in shambles. He kept working to take care of the kids, but it seemed like he could never earn enough money, and everything had happened so fast that he just felt hopeless. Regrettably, Glenn admits he made the wrong decision. Instead of getting back together with Doris, who was a really good woman, Glenn began, quote, running around with other women. He was numbing the pain through promiscuous sex, alcohol, and he went back to fighting again. So most of his days were drowned out with liquor. This is when Glenn meets a woman named Darlene. And you brought this up, Dylan, so I don't really know a whole lot about Darlene's past. But I do know she had a young son named Bobby Joe Collins who was taken away from her by social services when she was 18. So she was a teenage mom. She was a drug user who liked the party life. And like Glenn, Darlene spent a lot of time in honky-tonks and juke joints.
Oh, wow. I've spent many a night in an old sweaty juke joint down by the bayou.
You have?
Oh, yeah.
Is that the same as just a dive bar?
Oh, yeah. What's any bar I'm in's a juke joint.
I just like to go drink it, like the Legion or something.
Yeah. That's where you find the real ones.
That's the fun place to go, right?
Cheap drinks.
On December 1st, 1975, Glenn married Darlene, though he was not yet divorced from Doris. Glenn married her using his stepfather's name.
Oh, so to avoid a bigamy charge, he married her under a false name, basically.
Yes.
Well, not basically. That's what he did.
If you were getting married to a guy and he was like, sorry, babe, I can't marry you under my real name. Why? What? I would be like,
Well, that's not a good way. Not a good way to start out a relationship.
No. It seemed Darlene and Glenn thought if they got married, Darlene might get her son back from foster care, but it didn't work. And by the way, Doris's birthday was December 1st, and that was also the date she and Glenn had gotten married. And then now he's marrying his second wife on Doris's birthday and the anniversary of their marriage, the first marriage. So I'm going to say Glenn just doesn't want to have to keep up with dates.
Yeah.
So it's just an easy date to remember,
It's
right?
pretty smart. I'm gonna pick one day of the year, and I'm gonna change everything over to it.
You should.
Yeah.
I can't even remember our wedding anniversary. I always have to ask you.
Well,
Like, was it the 26th or the 28th?
we know it's in that window
Yeah.
sometime, and that's what we always say. It's around the 27th.
So sometime around the end of August, we celebrate, right?
Yeah.
Doris considered filing bigamy charges against Glenn, but she even went to an attorney to talk about this, but she decided she would do better. She actually planned to kill her ex-husband and his new wife.
Oh no, Doris!
So we could have had an entirely different true crime story.
So she's just like he's went too far. Now he's running around this little harlot. It's a harlot.
It's a harlot, Dylan.
A harlot. Yeah, and so she's had enough of it, and she's pissed.
She's mad.
Okay,
She's big mad.
She's big mad.
She's woman scorned mad.
Don't mess around with anyone that's scorned in their feelings like that.
No. So they all three went to work on this construction project together. It was constructing this 3-story building, and Doris goes along to help and make some money. So they're all working on this construction site, and Doris concocts this plan that she's going to push them both out of the 3rd-story window.
I'm like, I don't know what happened.
Yep. But eventually she decides it's not worth it.
I do know one thing, that neither of them tied off.
In 1976, she finally divorces Glenn. Now, she's given custody of the children, and Glenn is supposed to pay her $200 a month in child support, but he never does. Glenn was drinking heavily throughout this time. One afternoon, after he had kind of been in the stupor for most of the day, 2 men who had been out praying in the woods stopped by Glenn's house, and they told him, we came by to pray with you. God told us we needed to come pray with you. With nothing to lose, Glenn starts praying with the men. Now, after this, Glenn feels a renewed sense of self and called home to be, with the Lord. He's I need to go back to church. I need to get my life right. Not that he's called home dead, but he's, he gets this calling from the Lord.
Yeah, and he takes this pretty seriously, right?
Yeah, so he and Darlene started going to church, hoping to, quote, get right. Both wanted to give up the dance halls, booze, and Glenn wanted to give up fighting. He had also racked up a few assault charges from handing out all of those beatdowns to people, and often outside of the boxing ring. So he's already, got a criminal record. He realizes I'm not on a good track here.
Well, you take a guy like that in a small town, and word's going to get around. He's the toughest guy around, this type of thing. That, again, with the Buford Pussard, had a similar reputation. And people are going to try him. And he's not, one to sit there and, I'm going to assume, let you talk shit to him. No. He'll put his hands on you.
Yeah.
In a bad way.
Yeah. So it's at this time that these gentlemen show up at his door wanting to pray with Glenn, that he is living in Fackler, Alabama, on top of the mountain, which it's kind of interesting. There is a documentary that we watched that was one of our resources today, and I'll give you that information at the end of the story. But one of the police officers talks about up on the mountain and the difference in town people and the mountain up on the mountain people. Right. So Glenn's up there on the mountain, and he starts fasting and praying. Glenn was nearly illiterate, so reading the Bible seemed out of reach. And that's when Glenn says the Lord told him to lock himself in a bedroom for 30 days. Glenn claims that he had no food or water during this time. So he's fasting, he's praying. He just feels completely rotten inside for this 30 days, Well, after the 30 days, he leaves the bedroom and he joins Darlene and their young son, Marty. Soon after he's left the bedroom, he's eating dinner with them. God calls him again and tells him, you need to fast for another 30 days. And if you do this, I will provide you with the knowledge of the Bible.
I've got to say, I don't believe he really fasted without water and food for 30 days straight. I mean, can you even do that?
Scientifically, no.
Oh, you'll die without water.
But
right?
I'm not going to discredit anyone's faith.
I'm not discrediting it discrediting it. Well, I guess I am. I mean, it just doesn't seem logically or like possible.
Right.
But he believes it went this way, and it's left a mark on his life. So I guess that's all we have.
Well, after the second 30 days, Glenn came out reading the Bible and like reciting the Bible. He knew it front to back.
So he went from basically illiterate, barely functioning, to not only reading the Bible, but reading all the Bible to the point where he's memorized passages and can quote parts of the Bible.
Yes.
Okay, well that's a pretty big change.
And he couldn't stop. He was so filled with the Spirit that he just wanted to consume more and more of God's Word, just thirsty for, more of this information. Now, at one particular prayer meeting, there was a man who was laying hands on the congregation. Glenn said when this man came, close to him, he heard God tell Glenn, you need to lay hands on this man and you're going to cast out a devil.
Oh, yes, that's another part of the Pentecostal belief, right?
Right. So when this man comes around, to touch Glenn, Glenn reaches for this guy, puts his hands on him. He says the man falls backwards and starts hollering and kind of on the floor convulsing. Glenn apparently had cast a demon out of this man. So he begins working with the pastor of this church very closely. He sort of becomes like the assistant pastor. It's the Mink Creek Holiness Church. And while he's there, Glenn baptizes over 750 people.
Wow.
Word began spreading about Glenn, and more people began coming to church. And this is going on for a while until finally Glenn and Darlene decide they want to open up their own church.
So I'm being called to service for the Lord, and we want to do our own thing.
Yes.
Now it's interesting that some of these people claim that when they cast these demons out of people, to see a physical creature of sorts come out of the people and scurry away anywhere it can. Now, I must say, obviously, I'm the skeptic. I would never believe that unless I saw it. But if I did see that happen, would you be able to process that and handle it? Or would it totally blow your mind and freak you out?
Well, maybe a bit of both.
Something along the lines of like a water dog or salamander basically slithering out of someone and running away.
It would change my opinion of a lot of things. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I don't know if I could handle it. I don't know if my brain would be able to make that work for me.
One day up on Sand Mountain, which is also, I guess, kind of a famous spot if you look at the history of serpent handling. There was another famous minister, Pentecostal minister, who was into serpent handling that lived on Sand Mountain, and there's a book written about him. I can't recall the fellow's name right now. But Glenn is in this area. He's hiking on Sand Mountain one day, and he sees a copperhead on the trail. So he stops and starts praying when he sees the snake. For whatever reason, he just feels like he needs to stop and start praying. Well, Darlene walks up, and she's like, oh, I'll kill that snake. But instead, Glenn's like, no, I need to get this snake. So he just starts picking it up. And when he does, he says he felt the Holy Spirit like coursing through his veins.
Oh my gosh.
And that he knew, like, no, he's not going to be bitten. Like, I'm protected from the snake.
Okay.
Darlene immediately, like, falls to her knees and starts praying when this happens. And Glenn had never seen anyone take up the serpent or handle snakes before. Now, it was something he had heard of, but never seen. He just felt like he needed to start doing this. He'd grown up hearing about this church on Sand Mountain that did take up serpents, and he'd even gone to that church as a young man, like kind of just wanting to see the spectacle, but they weren't getting the snakes out at that time. So he'd never actually seen it done. So he's kind of like just winging it here.
So
he has no professional snake handling training, Dylan.
Right. He didn't grow up in a church where they handle snakes.
No.
He didn't watch his dad
he did not
or his
have like
mom
a
do it.
standard operating procedure of like how you snatch up the snake or anything.
You just pick it up. And if it bites you, you're evil.
Yeah, I ain't picking that shit up.
If it don't bite you, you ain't evil.
No, they are evil. I hate the snakes.
They're just an old legless lizard.
Oh, they're more than that. If there's a demon on earth, it's a snake.
Well, snakes are creepy. I mean, I don't care. And I've owned
I
pet.
hate
I've
them.
I've handled snakes,
I hate you.
pet snakes.
Ew, why?
Yeah, well, I had a king snake. It was pretty cool.
No. Did
But
it have a crown? How did you know it was a king?
because he eats,
Did you call it that? Were you like, good morning, king?
he eats all the other snakes. That's why he's a California king snake.
Okay.
Yeah, he was beautiful. He's black and white, like a zebra. Yeah, but anyway, so Glenn's like more of, I'm communicating with God. This is what God's telling me to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, at first, the couple began handling snakes at home, but they didn't ever take them to church. It was actually about maybe 8 or 9 years into their marriage, and they had been handling snakes for, some years before they introduced them to their church
Oh, so they were just doing it on the weekends.
at home.
Get the snakes out. I feel like touching it.
Glenn opened up his own church in 1981 in an old gas station, and it was called Church of God with signs following. They had a homemade sign, and Glenn was a charismatic, impassioned reverend who had several dozen members attending his church regularly.
Charismatic.
He was very charismatic
Okay.
and impassioned.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, so I like the homemade sign. They probably just like nailed it over the sign at the gas station.
And they got someone who didn't have very neat handwriting to do the lettering.
Yeah.
And I was like, you should be a little more concerned with like fonts, right?
No.
I guess branding wasn't really a thing in 1981.
Well, they were just it was hey, we're gonna make this happen
At
one
least
way or the
they
other.
didn't use like Comic Sans. Glenn, the fiery preacher, had begun wearing long-sleeved white shirts to cover up his old tattoos. Not only was he handling snakes, but he also drank strychnine and engaged in other risky behaviors, knowing his faith would carry him through any tribulation.
No, that's interesting. So that's another part of the verse. Anything you drink will not harm you. Is that something like that?
Yes.
So I thought that growing up that they were actually drinking the snake venom, building up a slow tolerance up to the snake venom. But you pointed out, no. Typically, they had like the poison jar. Basically, they would get out and take sips of strychnine, straight up strychnine.
Yup.
And I mean, it makes you wonder. And maybe it was diluted or something. How there wasn't more death and sickness tied to this. Maybe their faith is protecting them.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been studies of the psychology of faith, and those who do have a strong faith or are believers in something, sometimes can almost like mind over matter. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it.
Well, it is like those monks that can steam a wet blanket on a ridge top in the Himalayas. They've, and all this crazy stuff, slow their heartbeat down to where, and all their breathing. And they've been studied in the laboratories, and they really don't have a scientific answer for how they're able to control their body to that degree. And so maybe it's just like you said, mind over matter, the placebo effect.
At any given time, Glenn and Darlene might empty 45 snakes onto the pulpit
Oh my God.
at the front of the church.
Just a big slithering ball of snakes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are photos and videos of Glenn, like, sticking his hand into a wad of snakes and holding it up. And there's, 5 or 6 snakes just coiling around his wrists and shit.
That's scary.
Yeah. There were times Glenn had been bitten, or even folks in the congregation would be bitten. Other snake handlers had died on the spot in Tennessee and Florida, but Glenn always recovered from a bite. Though the couple portrayed faithful believers in front of their congregation, their personal relationship was in trouble. So Glenn has stated that throughout the 80s, Darlene stepped out of their marriage. She often felt ignored or neglected by Glenn's devotion to his religious beliefs. They weren't engaging in activities they once did, and this made Darlene feel insecure. Now, after one particularly nasty snake bite, Glenn was basically out cold for 7 days.
Oh my God, he's like a mongoose.
Yeah.
He just gets bit by the cobra and just falls out and sleeps for 3 or 4 days and then gets up and walks away.
Yeah. So he doesn't remember anything about this. For a whole week, he is basically in like a coma. Doesn't know, don't know his ass from a hole in the ground, Dylan.
Now, I wonder how in his mind he rationalizes when he does get bit and sick that God allowed that to happen. I mean, I don't...
Well, it seems like he often rationalizes it as like there's other things maybe happening. He knows he made a wrong choice or he didn't do something.
Oh.
So he feels like it's sort of a reminder, like, get your ass on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, we're going to let the snake bite you tonight, Glenn.
So he doesn't remember anything. And when he wakes up, Darlene confesses that she's been with another man.
So he's laid up recuperating from a snake bite, God forbid. And she's off running around.
Yes.
She done run off.
She done run off. Yes, with an OFT. Now he said, quote, "Whenever I got snake bit the last time, I put everything in God's hands. I prayed for her so much until the Lord showed me to just turn her loose. I couldn't keep casting devils out of her. I got to just put her in his hands, and that's what I did."
Okay.
So when others came to Glenn with news of Darlene's exploits, he would tell them, quote, "I won't say nothing about it. Just don't say nothing about it. We'll pray about it, and God will take care of it." So he was like, I'm not blind to what my wife is doing. I knew what she was up to, but I put it before God. And it was up to the Lord to deal with her.
Wow, I guess there's a comfort in having faith like that. I mean, that'd be a tough situation to work through.
Now, 36-year-old Darlene Summerford, she had a 7th grade education. She had been handling these snakes for about 5 years at church when she finds herself in a precarious situation, Dylan. In the first week of October 1991, she and Glenn had been arguing constantly. Now, according to Darlene, Glenn was making accusations that she had been unfaithful with another preacher named Gene Sherbert. And this is after Glenn says he watched the man leave their home. And when he sees his wife come out with this guy, she's wearing completely different clothes. And he says they, quote, defiled the marital bed.
So he's just kind of back around the edge of the property watching the home, sees this man there.
He had been out in the woods praying.
Yeah.
He approaches. He watches this man go in his house. They're in there for
about an hour. Wow. Damn,
when
Gene.
they leave, the guy's, buttoning his pants. Darlene comes out wearing different outfit. Yeah.
And they both seem satisfied.
They both seem disheveled.
Damn, Gene.
Yeah.
Sherbert's bringing it.
But Glenn says for a month leading up to this tryst, that Darlene had been making confessions of various affairs. When she would admit she had done something wrong, she would say, quote, "Now you're going to hit me for this." And she really does kind of talk like that. I just have to do the accent when I speak for Darlene.
So basically, what he's saying that she's almost trying to get him to hit her.
Well, yeah.
By telling him all these
and that's
things.
what my next line is. It's as if she wanted him to hit her.
Oh.
Like she's trying, Glenn's like, and I knew, he's like, I knew what she was up to because God had revealed it all to me. So instead, he just didn't react at all, which seemed to make her want to get a rise out of him. So she kind of kept telling him more and more. Like, well, I slept with this guy and I had sex with this guy and yeah.
Very unhealthy interaction between these two.
It's dysfunctional. They're a very dysfunctional couple, right? Now, Darlene had taken some sleeping pills this week, and Glenn had told their son Marty, and now he's 13 at this time, that his mother was trying to commit suicide. And Darlene, she did have a history of suicide attempts before Glenn had married her. She had been hospitalized for several suicide attempts.
Slashing her wrist, things of that nature.
Right. So this leads to a physical fight between them. Now, she alleges that Glenn threw her to the ground and started beating on her when he finds that she's taken these sleeping pills. But Glenn told Dr. Burton, who wrote the story, The Serpent and the Spirit, that was one of my main resources for today, how Marty, their young son, their 13-year-old son, had actually discovered his mom taking this bottle of sleep medication he runs outside, tells his dad, like, Mom took all these sleeping pills, and is very upset. So Glenn goes in the house, and he finds her nearly unconscious. He forces her to drink a whole bunch of water, and that's when Darlene runs outside, and she starts throwing up in the grass, and it's, like, blue because she's taken so many of these, like, sleep aids.
Oh, my gosh.
This over-the-counter sleep medication. Now, around this time, the church had to relocate buildings. So they had moved, from their little gas station. They were moving to a separate space. And one of the male members was a guy named J.L. Lewis. He would often help with money, like for the church. Sometimes would give Glenn and Darlene money because, times were tight. They didn't have a lot. He was helping with the new lease and utilities. So Glenn sent Darlene to get this money. Now, eager to get out of the house, she agrees. JL owned a small business in Huntsville, Alabama, and he was considered well off. So she drives all the way to Huntsville to get this money, and he gives her a few $100s. But before she leaves the room, JL kisses her during this brief encounter and confesses his love.
Oh, no, JL. That's not cool, bro.
Darlene, when she gets back home, reports this to Glenn.
Okay, now what's...
Now, JL tried to kiss me, but it didn't mean nothing, Glenn.
I was thinking about you the whole time.
I love you, Glenn.
It's just... now, with Darlene, is that out of respect to her husband, or is that just another way to get a rise out of him? Some other thing to tell him to get him pissed off?
Okay. I got the tea for you. It's steaming hot. Okay?
Yeah.
So J.L. Lewis would say in the book The Serpent and the Spirit that Darlene was often sexually aggressive with men at the church, like the men of the congregation behind Glenn's back. And that, he did not kiss Darlene, that this is a fabricated story, that she's clearly trying to, like, create some issue between, a wedge between these two men. He's like, I absolutely didn't kiss her.
Okay.
But the following day, Glenn shows up at JL's office in the parking lot and assaults him by, like, taking a timing chain from the car and whacking him in the back of the head with it.
Okay, so I'm assuming he had a timing chain in the car.
I'm going to assume it's not from the car because otherwise how is he going to drive off?
Well, he'd be like, look, you just hold right there. About an hour or so, I'll be inside this sumbitch.
Yeah.
And you're going to get what's coming for you.
My God.
JL.
Oh, God. A timing belt? A timing chain? That's like one of the worst auto repairs.
Oh, yeah. It's not good.
Because they, like, literally have to, like, take out the entire, like, engine and shit.
It's not good.
Yeah.
And so, like, 3 hours later, JL's like, I don't know if you're really going to do this. I don't believe you. He's like, you give me a 9/16, you son of a bitch. I almost got it.
Exactly.
I know that's probably not the right bolt or nut. I don't care.
Okay. Well, JL stumbles away, like, oh, he's been hit. And he's denying kissing Darlene. He's like, I absolutely didn't have anything to do with this. But immediately, Glenn and Darlene drive away for fear that JL's going to go call the cops.
So she finally got a rise out of Glenn.
Yes.
And it is interesting that this is a guy who helps Glenn, is helping him maybe grow the church, certainly helping him move it, and helps them out from time to time financially. So, I mean, who's to say she's not trying to cause a rift between these two men?
Well, that night, they go home. They sleep in separate rooms. This is like on a Thursday, this first week in October, right? And they've been fighting all week. It's just been madness. So by Friday night, JL had wanted to meet with Glenn to discuss what had happened. Now, Darlene says that Glenn was drinking vodka and orange juice like all day and that he was very, very drunk. So like the whole day, he's all the way up to 11. He's turned.
He's just slamming screwdrivers all day?
Toasted.
Oh, my God. It gives me such heartburn thinking about it.
I know, right? I can't do the orange juice anymore. Ooh. Now, this was October 3rd, right? But JL avoids this meeting. So they go back home. They had made some pit stops, whatever, had gone to like Glenn's older children's home and whatnot. But when they get back to their house, a fight breaks out. Okay, so I have two versions of what happened. I've got Darlene and Glenn, and then somewhere in there, I guess, is the truth. right?
Well, yeah, isn't that what they say? There's your version, my version, and the truth.
Than what actually happened.
Right.
Okay, so this is Darlene's version, Dylan.
Now, these versions are quite different.
Now, at some point, Glenn tells Darlene, I'm going to shoot you. He found a shotgun in the house, and he's got it. Darlene, she's fearing for her life. She takes off running up this hill outside their home. Glenn's chasing her with a shotgun. Now, Marty, their 13-year-old son, obviously disturbed by this, right? He grabs a bow and arrow and goes outside. He draws it back and aims it at his father and actually shoots the arrow, and it just barely misses Glenn's head, hits a tree, right? So at that point, it's like, okay, we're going to have a family timeout.
Well,
We're
yeah.
going to reassess the situation,
Whole-
okay?
Well, this is not good. It's very inappropriate behavior on the parents' part. And then this poor kid's tied up in the middle of it.
Exactly. Okay, so they're like, okay, we gotta call it a timeout. We all go back in the house. We're regrouping. That's when Darlene says she calls a relative, which is actually Glenn's older daughter from his previous marriage, to pick up Marty.
And I must say, if Glenn did do these things and threaten her with a gun, chase her out of the house and all that, that's horrible. That's a very traumatic, horrible thing, and no one should ever be treated like that.
Well, she was, feeling like her son could be in danger if he stayed in the home. She just wanted him out of there. And, Glenn wanted him to go too, I guess, so that, they could fight in private. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's like, I can't even fight your mama without you in my business. Boy, you won't give me no space.
Yeah. So once their son is gone, Glenn grabs Darlene by the hair and he holds a gun to her head. He then drags her outside to the shed where they keep the snakes. He told her, I don't want you anymore. I don't want to live with you anymore, but I also don't want anyone else to have you.
But they've been having her.
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
Well, Glenn told his wife, look, I'm going to make you get a snake bite, and I'm going to say that you committed suicide by snake.
Okay. And so he's got to, no, so this is her version.
This is her version.
This is horrible.
Yes.
If this is happening, this is horrible. And okay, now you're going to get bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
So put your hand in there.
Now that's horrible. I mean, could you imagine?
No, because this is like my worst nightmare. I would say just shoot me.
I don't think you would put your hand in there.
I would rather just shoot me. I'm not putting my hand in there.
And you would be for reals.
No, you're not gonna. No. Now he orders her to take the lid off of one of the snake boxes so his fingerprints wouldn't be on it. This is according to Darlene.
The only thing I would say about that is he touches these boxes all the time. Okay? So his fingerprints both their fingerprints are on the boxes already.
Yeah.
Okay? But
look, Dylan, these are not forensic experts, okay?
What's true. And I must, for those out there thinking, okay, so basically you got a kind of a thin wooden box is where they would keep these snakes, typically individually, one snake in a box, and maybe like a little screened window where you can see into the box, and that lid kind of slides open, and then you get access to the snake.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Dylan, I have a big treat for our listeners.
Wow.
If you would like to see video footage, like actual footage of Glenn handling snakes in church, I have a copy of that. I will be adding that video to our Instagram.
Now, I must say,
feed.
Heather was rather excited when she discovered this video. I was like, oh my God, this is like actually him doing the thing.
Yeah.
And so I've yet to see it myself. So I will join the listeners there at our Instagram, and I'm going to look at that.
Yeah, Mountain Murders Podcast. Check it out. Okay.
Heading to the gram.
So if Darlene refused, he told her that he would force her face inside so she would get bitten in the face. And Darlene's like, I know if I got bitten in the face, I would die.
So she knows from past bites, just handling snakes, that it would be worse if you're bitten around your neck or face compared to being bit on one of your appendages.
Yes.
Say your leg or your hand.
Right. Now,
Oh my God.
the Western Diamondback, which had never made an appearance at their church, bit Darlene on the thumb when she reached into the box. After this, Glenn orders her to take the lid off 2 rattlesnakes that are in a big box. And he explains that if she can handle both of those rattlesnakes without being bitten, he would let her live.
Okay.
So I guess this happens, right? And then Darlene goes to sleep on the sofa, and she's feeling quite ill because she's got a snake bite on her thumb.
What's what happens when you bitten by a snake?
It is?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just horrible. And these rattlesnakes, rather pretty rough poison, right? Each snake's different. But, and what really freaks me out about it is how at the site of the bite, it will start the venom just starts basically killing your skin. And it just almost immediately starts kind of rotting away. And it's just horrible. And then it gets in your blood. I mean, it's just, it's a whole... There's a reason humans avoid snakes.
Okay. So Glenn says this is not what happened at all. Okay. Now, Glenn claims that this bite on her thumb was actually about a week old, and it came from a pet raccoon that they had in the house. That this raccoon, though it was a pet, if you would kind of grab it, like pick it up, it would bite you. It would bite you.
Sometimes it would bite you.
Right. So it had bitten her like a week earlier and had started to heal up on the thumb. And Marty, the son, also confirmed this story, that mom got bitten by a raccoon on the thumb about a week before this. And that's the bite mark on the thumb. All right. So Glenn says, they come home. He's like, I was drunk. We were sitting on the couch watching TV. And that's when Darlene told him that she had slept with his 2 older sons.
Okay. I mean, how do you even process that information?
Well, they would have been around 13 and 14 at this time that she is claiming she had sex with them while Glenn was out of town.
So she molested his sons.
Yeah.
Basically.
So one of Glenn's sons actually admitted to his father that, yes, Darlene had sex with him. But the other son denies these allegations all around, saying it never happened, right? So Glenn's taking this information in, and he tells Darlene, I'm going to go file for divorce on Monday. Like, I don't want to be with you. That's the last straw. I'm going to go file for divorce.
Well, it doesn't sound like they need to be together.
No.
I think they're definitely candidates for let's split up before we really, go too far and one of us ends up dead, and let's just go our separate ways.
Now, Glenn would later say that he felt Darlene flipped out when he tells her, I'm getting a divorce, because she starts thinking about custody of their son, Marty. She's already lost a boy, and she's, damned and determined she's not going to lose custody of her son. Which is another reason why when they fight and she tells him like she doesn't want to be with him, but she won't leave him because she's afraid he's going to get custody of their son. I like it. You're just looking at me like that.
Well, no, I'm taking that in. And so, I mean, she has these unresolved, trauma and issues of having, lost custody of her first child.
Which is interesting that Glenn married a woman who almost had the same exact situation and behavior as his mother.
Yeah, well, that's one thing I was going to say there. Yeah, exactly. So, that's very interesting. But that makes sense if that is her viewpoint on the situation of why she maybe is staying around, because she doesn't want to lose custody of her child.
The following day, which is a Saturday, she and Glenn, they wake up, they run some errands, like returning videotapes and purchasing more liquor. Brenda Davis, who owned the video store, would later testify that Darlene did, in fact, come in the video shop to return some tapes, and that she did seem like she had a bit of a swollen hand, and she appeared to be pale while she was in the store.
So at this point, in Darlene's version, he held the gun on her, forced her to put her hand in there, and she was bitten by a rattlesnake.
Yes.
In Glenn's version up to this point, he didn't do that. Nothing happened that night. The wound on her hand was already there from a previous bite from a pet raccoon.
Yes.
Okay.
However, Darlene never said anything to this woman in the video store about Glenn holding her hand in a box full of snakes. nor did she ask this woman to call for help because she's in the video store by herself. Glenn's out in the car.
Right. So you would think, even given battered women syndrome and all those things, this was a good opportunity because you got to think in her version, at this point, you got to be thinking, okay, this is worse than he's ever done me. This is getting bad. He may kill me.
Yes.
So you would think maybe she would reach out for some type of help or say something to the lady. And now if she doesn't and really is in the situation, that's not for me to say if she's wrong or right or what she should have done. But it's quite possible that you would think she would say something.
Right.
Or even just
because
tell her
she's
what
in
happened.
Fear for her
Right.
life.
Right. At a certain point, you would think.
He keeps telling her, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to make it look like a suicide. I'm going to make you get bitten by a snake. And he's holding a gun to her head.
And I've been bitten by a snake already, and now I'm out running errands the next day,
Yes.
taking videotapes back to the store.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so Glenn's, I guess he points out holes in Darlene's story because he's like, if she was bitten by a rattlesnake,
Okay.
she would not be out. If she was bitten Friday night by a snake, she would not be out Saturday running errands.
She couldn't be up walking.
He's like, she would be deathly ill. She wouldn't be able to, be up, walking around, much less carrying on like a normal person going in a video store, having conversation, returning tapes. Like, that wouldn't happen.
This coming from a guy who's been bitten by snakes multiple times and kind of knows what
Was out 7 days.
he felt like
Cold.
afterwards. Okay.
With witnesses saying he was out for 7 days, right? Okay, something to think about. Now, by Saturday night, Glenn's, they've gone back to the liquor store. He's drinking. He's pounding the vodka drinks.
More orange juice.
Yes. Bring me your finest squeezed orange juices from the freshest groves of Florida.
And your fermented potatoes.
Yes.
I'm making a screwdriver.
So by Saturday night, Glenn is once again holding Darlene at gunpoint, according to Darlene, forcing her to handle the snakes.
Again.
Yes.
Okay.
This time, she is attacked by a venomous snake, and she's bitten on the back of the left hand, which is the same hand where she claims she was bitten the night before on the thumb.
But he claims is an existing bite from the pet raccoon.
From the pet raccoon.
And I just keep going over that because, for one, I need to keep it clear in my simple head. But it's just you got to keep making those distinctions about whose story we're talking about because it's happening at the same time.
Right. Now, Darlene begs Glenn for medical care, but he's not allowing her to use the phone. He tells her, you need to write 2 notes and I'll take you to the hospital.
Okay.
If you refuse, I'm going to shoot you. Right? So Glenn dictates these 2 notes that she is to write, and one of them is addressed to their son, Marty. I'm going to read the note to you.
Oh.
Are you prepared for my dramatic reading as Darlene?
Yes, I've heard this before. This is great.
I will read it. Quote, Marty, I love you. I love do what Daddy say. Daddy was asleep. I tried to fix everything, but it didn't work out. Don't blame Daddy because he loves me and trying to help me, but wouldn't listen. But I wouldn't listen. Daddy is asleep, and he don't know what I'm doing, Marty. Always remember, I love you for the good, not the bad. But I love you. Try to get right. Your mama. I went out and got snake bit. Glenn is asleep and don't want no help. I don't want no help. And you and Daddy live right, okay? I love you.
Okay. So I like the reiterations that he's asleep.
Yes,
Glenn's asleep.
right.
He has nothing to do with this.
Yes.
He's not making me write this letter.
Mm-hmm.
These are my own heartfelt words.
Yes.
And just remember, I love you for all the good and not the bad.
Yes.
Okay, so if that happened, that would be very strange and unnerving if you were Darlene.
Now, some folks, of course, including a district attorney, will later take that note and say, well, it's obvious Glenn had her write this note and kept expressing that he wasn't involved. He was asleep. So it's clear that Glenn made her write this note.
Oh, wow.
But I am just going to throw out another theory. Darlene does not strike me as like the most prolific writer, right? And she's not real bright, Dylan.
Well, I mean, you said she had seventh grade education.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, those are some dim lights, okay?
Okay.
Not to victim shame Darlene.
Now, Heather's been immersed in this for quite a while.
Yes.
So I respect your viewpoint on the characters of this story.
That being said, having researched Darlene and her speech patterns, the way her mind works, I could see she might write a note like this.
Okay. So you think it would be structured like this?
Perhaps.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
I'm just saying. Now, Darlene is begging him for medical care. She's written the notes. She's done what he wanted. And he told her, if you write these, I'll take you to the hospital. But he's telling her, no, you got to write the second note to your sister, confessing that you've slept with her husband, which also happens to be Glenn's stepbrother.
So did she do that too?
I don't know.
Now, I've got to say, it seems to me like possibly Darlene has an issue with sex.
I think she's maybe has an addiction.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. I'm no psychiatrist. I'm not here to diagnose Darlene, but I am. I think she has I think she's like hypersexual.
No, I think certainly, and that obviously can cause a person issues in their life and relationships.
Yeah, many members of the congregation have come forward and said she tried to kiss me, she hit on me, she tried to have sex with me. So, I mean, this was kind of common knowledge.
She was known to say, "Let me handle your snake." Yeah, we're
okay.
here now. It's dad talk.
Yeah. So after Darlene pens this letter, Glenn doesn't take her to the hospital. Eventually, he passes out drunk on the couch. And that's when Darlene is able to hook up the landline that he had unplugged from the wall. If you remember back in the day, actually had to plug the phone into the wall, right?
Yeah. Plug it in the phone outlet.
And that's when she calls 911 around 3 a.m. or so. She manages to go outside, and she claims that she had to crawl through muck and mud and sneak away from Glenn. And by the time she is walking down the road, she's managed to climb through all this muck and mud, 5 hills up, 5 miles uphill in the snow, whatever. That's when the ambulance is creeping up and they don't have their lights on. When she called 911 and said, Glenn's trying to kill me, the operator told the paramedics this is a code 1, which means you go in with no lights, no sirens, quiet.
So they're kind of creeping in. They're way off the beaten trail.
Right, and these two paramedics, they don't exactly know what they're getting into.
And they basically just come upon this woman walking down the road toward them.
Pitch black.
Right.
Dark. They see this woman, and they said, yeah, she did have like a little bit of dirt, like on her knees, just slightly, as if maybe she had tripped and fallen into the dirt at some point.
Certainly not
covered
that
in mud.
she army crawled away from the house for 200 yards.
No, which I think is an important detail to consider as we go on. Darlene is taken to the local hospital, but it being such a small town, they didn't have any anti-venom. Darlene would have to be transported to Birmingham.
And that's not unusual.
No.
If you're in most hospitals, unless they're in a highly snake-populated area where people are...
Like Phoenix or Tucson.
Yeah,
or
most
like that.
hospitals, even your bigger ones, are not going to have various types of anti-venom. They got to be specific to that breed of snake and that type of snake and all that. So that's not unusual, let alone in a rural hospital setting.
I've heard that anti-venom is fairly expensive, and I don't know how true that is, but I've heard if you get a snake bite, it's pretty costly.
No, but and I think the people there at the hospital, it's just not something they normally treat or normally see.
Well, by now, where Darlene was bitten on the back of her left hand, that skin is starting to turn black from the bite. It's, basically rotting. It's
Oh my
dying. Gosh. What do they call that?
Necromancy?
No.
And then her hand, like she cut it off and then it was trying to fight her.
I'm an idiot. I'm sorry. No, it's whatever that. Is it called necropsy? necropsy.
Necropsy. I think you might be
Is
onto
that
something.
what it's called when the skin turns? Anyway.
The Necronomicon made it happen.
Right. So anyway, let's just say her hand's fucked up. Okay, it's
And
turning
this
black. It's got a big old snake bite.
This scares me.
Yeah.
This is when they describe brown recluse bites. Those are the worst. They make like this big golf ball size, just, hole where
Okay.
the bite. So, yeah, this is horrible. She's getting worse. The venom's coursing through her veins. Everything's getting worse. She's getting sicker.
Yes. So, they take her to Birmingham. Her skin is blackening from this bite. And the paramedics, they would later testify that while they're speaking with Darlene, trying to take down this report of what's happened to her, they've got this drive to Birmingham.
Which is a good 80 or 90 miles.
Gentleman's trying to talk to her, find out what happened. The paramedics testified Darlene made no comments about being assaulted, being beaten. That she just kept talking about the snake bite, but she never once says anything about my husband beat me up. I have bruises. I have these marks. Nothing like that.
And I think that's rather important because so they've already went out in the country, gotten her and brought her to that hospital, and they don't have anti-venom. Load her back up in the, they didn't just spend 10 minutes with her. They spent probably an hour plus. Load her back in the ambulance and then drive her 80 or 90 miles to Birmingham. And the whole time you have the guy in the back working with her, and you would think that she would be like, oh my God, look what's happened to me. Look what's been done to me. Right? Because this is a horrible case or
that
story.
She would tell the story. My husband's been beating on me all week.
Yeah.
And, she's not covered in muck and mud, which is what she will later testify, that she was covered in all this mud and dirt.
Now, we must also point out she could be in some type of a shock.
Right.
You never know how your brain's going to react to some traumatic event like this. So there's that possibility as well.
Right. I have to say, I'm kind of presenting both sides of this. I'm just going to be real honest because I'm very torn about what actually happened, right? And I'll kind of discuss that more here as we get into the trial. But I'm really torn. I really don't know what happened in this story.
As far as the evidence you've went over, the story, everyone's story, including the son, Marty.
Yes.
What he says about and thinks about his mom in all this. And I think it's all very important. And I'm sure people could kind of pick up that maybe you're not a huge Darlene fan or that you maybe don't believe some of the things she's doing.
I don't know a lot about Darlene, but just based on what information I have, seeing Darlene in interviews, I don't know. It was October 7th, so Monday, the following Monday, that an investigator with the Scottsboro Police Department receives notice of the incident on Barbie Lane involving the Summerfords. Glenn was asked to give a statement. So they reach out to him. We need you to come down here and make a statement about what's happened. Darlene reported that she had been assaulted twice by Glenn on both Friday and Saturday, that she'd been beaten up, as well as having been forced to get snake bites. Darlene did not reveal she had any previous contacts with snakes to this detective who's interviewing her. Though later, these detectives would see photos and videos of her handling snakes in church.
So she didn't make it obvious that she'd been handling snakes for years.
No.
Okay.
So they didn't know this couple's history. They didn't know anything about their religious beliefs.
So they're basically taking her story, which they should. Face value. He made me put my hand in a box with a snake and it bit me.
Yes.
That's basically all they know.
Now, initially, while they're questioning Darlene, she doesn't give detectives any information about the domestic squabbles that have happened all week. That she would later testify happened all week, leading up to the weekend's assault with the snakes. So she doesn't give them, there's been this whole week that every day my husband's beat my ass, and then he told me he was going to kill me.
So even after she's processed what's happening, she's getting medical treatment, she's had a moment to breathe, talking to investigators who are like, hey, what happened? What brought you to this situation? She's still not giving this story, this full story.
No.
Okay, interesting.
The Scottsboro police asked Glenn if they could conduct a search of his home. Like, we're going to get a warrant, we're going to do a search. If you know. But Glenn's like, no, come on over. He gives consent. And according to the investigator, Glenn was cooperative and said he had nothing to hide. He freely gave statements to law enforcement, and while searching his property, they make a videotape of the search. While being treated for snake bites at the hospital, Darlene learns she's pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
Now, Glenn, in the story, the serpent and the spirit, does not believe this child belongs to him. But it does seem that this son will have the Summerford name.
Okay.
So I don't know a whole lot of details. But in the story, Glenn doesn't seem to think that this is his child.
Well, she's constantly telling him someone else she's slept with, all these things to, in his word, get a rise out of him. Other people come to him saying, hey, Darlene's going around with this feller and that feller. Members of the church with all their, their stories. So I guess I can't blame that thought coming into Glenn's head. I mean, I think that's a pretty obvious thought that someone would have. That's, wait a minute, if she is pregnant, it's not mine. Because you got to imagine with all the domestic squabbling and the fights they've been having for weeks, that your love life's probably not on fire, right? I mean, you're probably not enjoying.
You're saying they ain't fighting and fucking?
Well, maybe that's their process.
Maybe
the big fight and then the hot sex or after. But I would guess that you're probably not having sex all that often.
Right. Well, and it almost seems like, now Glenn was like, hey, it didn't really affect our love life, but it almost seems like when Glenn devoted himself to the Lord and was filled with the Spirit, it really changed his lifestyle. And it almost seemed to indicate that maybe they weren't as intimate as they had once been, or maybe they weren't doing some of the things they had once done, and that Darlene felt like he didn't love her anymore because he wasn't doing. But he was like, I just wasn't. My mind was in a different place. So maybe she's been feeling ignored, and that's why she's stepping out. I don't know.
And his son recounted when he made this change and found the Lord, what he really did change his life, and that a lot of people didn't believe that the rough tumble Glenn, who will fight you, beat your ass, whatever, had changed, and now he goes to church every day.
Right. I mean, a lot of people who knew, I guess, the old Glenn and then knew the new version have said, if Glenn wanted Darlene dead, she would be dead.
Well, we discussed that. Glenn is not afraid of
he doesn't seem to be someone who has a whole lot of, impulse control.
No. And likely, I would think, if he was enraged, and I'm just guessing, that he would beat her with his hands. He doesn't have a problem hitting people. He's been doing it since he was a kid. And you would imagine that maybe, that's how he would assault her. I mean, because this is kind of a...
Well, and if Glenn wanted her to die, when she took sleeping pills, he would have just let her.
Well, and there's that.
I mean, I don't know.
There's
like
that.
Like I said, there's just a lot in the story. Well, Glenn Summerford, he's arrested and charged with 2 counts of assault to cause serious physical injury to Darlene Summerford by means of a deadly weapon or dangerous instrument. And this is on October 7th, 1991. In December of 1991, a grand jury issued an indictment charging him with the intent to commit murder by forcing his wife to place her hands in a cage holding live rattlesnakes. A judge allowed Glenn to remain free on a $20,000 bond. The trial began on February 10th of 1992. The trial would last 3 days. During this trial, several people testified, as I mentioned before, that Darlene had not told them all the details of the events leading up to the snake bites. There was a witness named Tammy Flippo who attended church with the couple, and she testified that on one previous occasion, Tammy had been actually assaulted by her ex-husband, had black eyes, was pretty banged up by this attack. She's outside with Darlene. Darlene's asking her, how you doing? What's going on? And that during this time, Darlene made statements that she wished Glenn would do that to her so she could leave him and get custody of Marty.
Oh.
Tammy also spoke to Darlene on October 21st or 22nd after the snake bite incident. And Darlene confessed that she had purposefully placed her hand in the snake box in order to get a snake bite with the plan of putting it on Glenn so that when he passed out drunk, she could throw the snake on Glenn and he would get bitten.
Oh, my gosh.
But instead, she was bitten by the snake.
So she was trying to get the snake and accidentally got bitten.
Yeah.
Okay. And now she testified?
This is what Tammy Flippo
Wow.
testified.
Wow.
Darlene said she wanted to kill Glenn because she didn't want to live with him anymore.
Well, I mean...
Same girl. Same.
Well, fortunately, I don't have to worry about being murdered by a snake you throw on me.
Now, others, such as a distant relative named Leslie Peace, testified that when Glenn was ill with that snake bite and was out for like 7 days straight, Darlene said in front of a group of several people, including Leslie Peace, that she wished he would just die so she could have her freedom.
Okay.
Now, the prosecution's case was built on Darlene's statements about Glenn. They claimed he had forced his wife to put her hand in the snake boxes, and he refused to take her to the hospital. They argued she was a woman who had been tortured, and her previous snake handling had nothing to do with this assault by Glenn.
Okay.
The prosecution, the district attorney, also discredited Tammy Flippo as a witness, bringing in another woman who testified that Tammy Flippo told her she had spent several nights with Glenn at his home.
Oh, so we have another witness saying basically...
Tammy and Glenn are shacked up.
And Tammy's lying for
Tammy's
Glenn.
lying. Okay. Isn't this like hearsay?
Well, it seems like everything you just described is hearsay.
Well, somebody told me that they's down there having sex. I mean, I don't know. To me, this is like, why are these people being allowed to testify when this is like hearsay?
I just thought that was a basic rule in the courtroom that it'd be easily objectable and say, objection, hearsay, Your Honor, and he would, of course, hold that would stand.
Well, it's really interesting what's allowed in court during this trial and what's not allowed in court. But the hearsay is allowed, which is so strange to me. Now, the defense accused the investigators of doing sloppy work. The lead detective hadn't taken any time to look into their backgrounds, had not looked into the fact that Darlene's a snake handler. All these people in the church are saying Darlene's a cheater. Darlene's this and,
Multiple people saying that she wishes Glenn would die so she could get away from him.
They haven't, looked into any of this background. So that's pretty sloppy police work.
Well, it doesn't seem like it would be that hard to figure some of these things out just by interviewing, people closest to them.
The defense attorney, his name is Gary Lackey. Now, he points out that several of the prosecution's witnesses have relatives or ties to the city of Scottsboro. Like Brenda Davis testified on behalf of the prosecution that, yes, she saw Darlene come in and she did appear to have a swollen hand and her face looked pale, right? Her husband was like, I think, a cop. So he's like, that it seems to me like that's a little conflict of interest.
Right.
Now, he accused the chosen witnesses of being on the payroll of the city because some of them were employed or had closely had close ties to the city through employment, like their husband was an employee or something like that.
So basically, to back up the prosecution, which is the city in a way, to back up the prosecution's case and story, you just happen to have these supporting witnesses that are somehow tied to either directly
to the police department.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
That kind of thing. Now, this defense attorney claims that Darlene has presented 3 different stories. One in October at this, initial interview. Then she gives a completely different story at the preliminary hearing. And when we go to trial, it's a different account.
You would think that is a red flag in some people's minds.
He argued that Darlene had a fascination with snakes, almost bordering on an obsession, and that she feared divorce because she had already been deemed an unfit mother once and lost a child. She didn't want to risk putting the family dysfunction before a custody hearing, knowing that she might stand a chance of losing her son. And Darlene was using the criminal justice system as a mechanism to get rid of her husband. But a jury finds Glenn guilty of attempted murder. Glenn Summerford was sentenced to 99 years in prison on March 3rd, 1992 by Judge Loy Campbell. Now, due to his prior felony convictions, He was given 99 years in accordance with the law as a habitual offender.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
On March 3rd, Summerford moved for a new trial. The motion was denied, and Glenn Summerford filed a notice of appeal alleging 4 grounds for this appeal. He first claimed the prosecutor suppressed exculpatory evidence, including previous statements made by Darlene that was inconsistent with her trial testimony. She didn't mention the beatings at trial, but she did in her statement. But when she got up on the stand, she didn't mention it at all. She mentioned it at trial, but not in her statement. Like, she never said he beat me up. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. She also said that, like when she was giving her statement to police, that he kept the gun in his waistband when he took her in the snake shed. But at trial, she's like, no, he held this gun to my head.
So it's more dramatic, more dialed up.
Yes.
But that's quite different.
It's quite different. The initial statement, when she's being interviewed by police.
Right.
Versus what she testifies.
And the red flag of conflicting statements is typically it leads one to believe that this person may be not telling the truth. And it's harder to keep up with a lie than it is what your perception of the truth. Because it's always through your perception.
Well, she also testified at the trial that Glenn had made her write the suicide note, and that he had urinated on her hair while she was passed out on the couch or when she was on the couch feeling sick. But she never mentioned this when she was giving the initial statement. She never said he peed on me or he made me write a suicide note.
Nor did the paramedic who was in tight quarters with her for an extended period of time ever say she smelled like urine.
Yes, that was my next point, Dylan, is that the paramedics never noted or mentioned that she smelled like urine.
Or stated, I've been peed on.
Yeah, and she's saying he did it right before he passed out, before I called. So it would have been very obvious if she had been pissed upon, Dylan.
Well, I would think so.
Yeah, but she seemed clean. They said she seemed clean, all other than she looked like her knees might have been a little dirty, as if she had fallen, maybe when she was walking from the house in the dark.
Now, when they found her, she was in bad shape.
Yeah, I mean, her hands
the snake
fucked
bite
up.
Was really bad. It progressed really, very swollen. She can hardly walk. I'm sure she was rather weak. So when they found her, she was not in good shape.
No, not at all. Mm-mm. And one of the jurors failed to note that he had actually known Darlene and her family for over 20 years. And that same juror was also watching Huntsville news broadcasts during the trial, was not sequestering himself from the news.
See, that right there is that's huge. I mean, I think just on that one count alone should get you a new trial, because that one juror can pollute the entire jury.
The Alabama Supreme Court refused to hear Glenn's appeal, even with this information. We find no trial error.
I mean, I don't know. I'm no student of the law, but it seems to me like there was some good...
No, this is all some bullshit.
I mean, it just seemed like there was good reason.
Would not fly, I don't believe, in any other court.
Yeah, and sometimes we've talked about this before. It's like the state can't admit that they might be wrong in some capacity. And other parts of the state or the system, which is all one, tied together, supports or upholds that what seems to be a bad decision of sorts.
In February of 2003, Glenn Summerford was charged with a second-degree escape, which was a Class C felony, and was denied parole on May 19th of 2003. It was in February that Glenn slipped away from a work detail, but he was apprehended about 45 minutes later, reportedly hiding in a trash can. He was then transferred from the Childersburg work facility to a state prison in St. Clair County. Okay. Now, we need to talk about a few things that were not mentioned in the trial that I have come across in my research that sticks out. Because if I were a juror, I would have a really hard time convicting Glenn based on the evidence that was presented at the trial.
Right, and that's the whole thing. We've even if you think the person's guilty, if they don't present enough evidence to get you beyond that reasonable doubt threshold, you still should not convict.
Right. I have reasonable doubts, and the only thing I know for sure about Glenn and Darlene is that they're like both dysfunctional, and they have a very dysfunctional marriage, and that's really all I know for sure, right?
Well, that seems obvious.
So I don't know if he's guilty or not, but I would have a hard time convicting him. So Charlotte Cologne, that is Glenn's half sister. She testified during a post-conviction hearing that she had seen Darlene at the hospital, once she was admitted to the hospital with a snake bite, looking pretty normal. She was clean, using normal speech, and was alert. And this would contradict Darlene's testimony that she was so ill she had to crawl through this muck and mud. And so if Darlene's going to lie about this very dramatic escape, what else did she lie about?
Well, I mean, I would key on that one fact if I was the defense attorney and get everyone I could think of who came into contact with her that evening, paramedics, doctors, nurses, admissions people, whatever, and have one person after another say, yeah, she wasn't covered in mud. She looked fairly normal, as far as her clothes go. And I would keep that, like you said, that would be the reason, because if she's lying about that, what else is she lying about?
Right. She also told Cologne that on several occasions she wanted to get rid of Glenn. And this is hearsay, so I can see why that maybe wasn't allowed in court.
It's just like
but
the other
But they
hearsay.
allowed the other folks to
Right.
basically say, well, I heard, I don't know. Okay, so there were some witnesses who said Darlene flirted with and came on to a number of men at church, which shows that she was a dishonest and untrustworthy person, right? But this also can fuel the idea that Glenn was insanely jealous and filled with rage.
Right.
Right?
To a point where he just snapped and did this other crazy thing.
And can we just pause for a moment and talk about Darlene's a pedophile?
Well, that allegedly, I mean, and it makes you wonder why one of the sons. I can understand why one of the sons would say no, that never happened, because it's a trauma that happened to them, and they haven't processed it, or hell, they blocked it out. You know what I mean? Their minds literally blocked it out, and they don't remember it. But then to have one of the children say yes, it did happen. Why would that child say that? And this was relayed to Glenn and through the mail, through letters. It was kind of back in the day. So it would take time to write the letter and actually mail it to your father. And it makes you wonder why one of the children would say, yes, this did happen, if it didn't happen. Right?
Right, because it doesn't seem like it was used against Darlene in court. I mean, nothing like that. So it's not really like this son or Glenn is like benefiting from this information, right? I mean, Glenn's still behind bars and Darlene's a free woman. Today's resources, again, we watched Alabama Snake, which is an HBO documentary. You can actually see Darlene in the documentary. We need to talk about that in a second. And then also the fact that, she seemed like she was on drugs in that documentary. I don't know.
Well, she could have some other issues we are not aware of, but she was acting strangely, I will say.
She never made eye contact with the camera.
No.
When she was telling her story, which I found her body language, the lack of eye contact, there was a lot going on in this documentary as far as Darlene goes. I don't know if she's got some sort of medical issue, but just her body language and the fact that she never would like look into the camera and tell her story was odd.
Well, I must say, I don't know if she has a mental issue or something, that's happened to her. All this, maybe caused her to be this way. But I must say, the way she was acting, I've seen people that I knew were strung out on drugs act that way. That's all I can say about it.
Right. And she was on Sally Jesse Raphael, which they use a clip of that appearance in the documentary. And she definitely seems much more confident and self-assured in her story on the Sally Jesse show.
Certainly.
Yeah. Also, a wonderful book called The Serpent and the Spirit, Glenn Summerford's story by Dr. Thomas Burton. He's a professor of English, or he was, I think he's retired now, at East Tennessee State University. And he's actually produced 3 documentaries on serpent handling and is somewhat considered like an expert on Appalachian serpent handling.
That's very interesting.
It is very interesting. And he spent like 50 years or so, like studying this, researching it, documenting. At ETSU, there's an Appalachian archives. It's got a lot of his, film footage, interviews with Glenn. He's a fascinating guy, Dr. Burton.
Yeah. Now, do you think now this jury would be out of his peers? They're from the area. Now, do you think that maybe they've kind of know? Hey, let's say his reputation precedes him, Glenn.
Well, now okay.
From where?
According to Glenn, he thinks that's the case. He's like, I think people have this idea of who I was, but they don't know who I am now, kind of thing. And I think that's very possible because he did have quite a reputation around this area.
Right. And then you throw in the snake handling.
Yes.
Which even in this area was not prevalent.
It was considered taboo.
Right. So some small group of people do it. The rest of the people around them probably think they're kind of kooky for doing that. And so, and then you have Glenn's reputation for whooping ass, being a fighter, a hellraiser. And I guess maybe it wouldn't be hard for the jury to think, well, he just went one step too far, mixed with the snakes. I mean, what did you expect?
Right.
Ah.
What I found interesting, if you want to watch the documentary Alabama Snake, of course, it's edited, heavily edited. It tells I'm not going to say an objective story.
Every documentary is made
right?
like that.
But what I did find interesting is, Marty, Darlene and Glenn's son, makes an appearance in the documentary and kind of gives his perspective of his father, his mom growing up, what he witnessed, what he saw. And the documentary kind of led me to believe that maybe Marty didn't quite buy his mother's story. I mean, he even says, like, I'm not sure.
Well, he says he can't really talk to her about things like that, about the past. And I know things can be edited, but some of his statements were pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
And I think Marty's statements, honestly, was some of the most compelling, one of the more compelling parts of the documentary, as far as what I think about the whole situation. Does that make sense?
It does. So, Dylan, I mean, what are your thoughts? I know I'm being kind of biased with this story, but I just don't know if I believe Darlene. And you know me, I believe victims, and I never try to victim blame, and I rarely try to take a side in a case and say, I think this person's full of shit. But I have to say with Darlene, I don't know if she's telling the truth.
Well, but I do think, which is a good thing, you're not afraid to point out when you don't believe the victims or their stories, which a lot of people are scared to do that because it can be taken the wrong way, and this may piss someone off. I'm sure we pissed people off in the past to a degree, but it typically takes a lot for you to get that in your head, I guess is what I'm trying to say, as far as you don't know if you really believe the victim's story. And I know you don't take that lightly. I know you do take that very seriously. So, and there tends to have to be a lot of evidence or a lot of different holes in it before you believe that or think that way.
This is a weak case.
Honestly, I agree.
Super weak
Again,
case.
I can think this guy's guilty, but the prosecution doesn't prove it.
The evidence is not there.
But, I mean, I don't know how you would go into this case, and but they didn't see the big picture. They didn't see the full picture, conflicting statements, blah, this and that. So, honestly, if I was on that jury as well, I don't think I could convict on this prosecution's case evidence.
And I'm sorry, I get that he's a habitual offender and he gets the 99-year sentence and he keeps being denied parole, but there are literally people who are
Murderers.
Out of prison who've done horrific things to children, who've murdered innocent people and get less time.
Yeah,
than this attempted murder. 99 years seems like a huge sentence given the situation.
Well, I mean, we time and again have heard cases that is even if you get life, as long as they don't say without the possibility of parole, you can be out in 18 or 20 years or even faster.
At this point, Glenn's been in prison over 30 years for this. And I think you have to look at the situation as well. Like, is this a man who's likely going to get out of jail or prison and go murder someone again or do this kind of thing again? I don't feel like he's a threat to society at this point.
No, given his age and given the whatever the issues were, they were between him and Darlene. And as long as I don't know, it's tricky. It's tricky, but I certainly do believe he's been in jail longer than many a molester, child killer, or murderer out there.
Yeah,
In a lot of instances.
exactly.
Okay, so that was a great case. It's got the Appalachian roots, as you call it. And thank you for that. We've kind of thought about this story for quite a while, and you turned me on to it. And I think it was great to finally get it down on an episode of Mountain Murders. And we appreciate everyone. And if they would like to get more of me and you in that ear, where can they go for that, Heather?
Oh, Dylan, well, there's a couple of ways, right? They can check out our second podcast, Batshit Crazy, drops every Thursday. We cover all the strange and unusual topics from aliens, UFOs. We love a good conspiracy theory, men in black, cannibals, vampires, cryptids. We are all over the map. If it's weird, if it's strange, if it's going to be creepy, we're going to talk about it.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
And... right?
But wait.
Oh, by the way, there's more. Haha. All you have to do is find us at patreon.com/Mountain Murders Podcast. And for as little as $1 a month, you can help sponsor the show, keep the lights on here at Mountain Murders, and you are going to access bonus content out the wazoo, Dylan. We have like 3 years of additional content.
Oh my gosh. Is that a plethora?
At Patreon.
There's so much over there.
We have a murder of content.
We have so much fun on Patreon.
We're okay. So with Patreon, we're definitely more relaxed, right? And we might say some stuff that's a little more risque. I'm just gonna put it out there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We're a little bit more unfiltered at Patreon.
It happens, but we have a lot of fun, a lot of laughs, and I'm sure some of our patrons can attest to the quality content that can be found there.
But a great way, if you don't have the money and you're like, hey, fuck y'all, I listen to y'all, but I ain't giving you no damn money because I know Dylan's probably just going to buy a beer with it.
Not true.
I'm going to get my plumbing fixed with this, what I'm going to do.
Yeah, we're trying to get the shit out of the toilet.
But besides that, you can just hit subscribe and leave us a great review. We love those 5-star reviews. They make us feel good and they keep us relevant in the charts. Of course, refer a friend. If you've got a friend out there who loves true crime, you got to tell them about Heather and Dylan.
Yeah, and I got another little task that people could do. It take just a second, no skin off your teeth. Don't forget, if you're ever stuck away from your little pocket computer and you can't access us in the big Ethernet, you can find us on YouTube. We actually have a YouTube channel. And it would do me a huge favor if you'd slide by there, check it out. And if you've already listened to all the episodes, that's fine because we love you. Hit that subscribe button because YouTube's screwing us out of money because we need a certain level and we're almost there. We're almost there. So you just go by there, do us a little favor, hit subscribe on your favorite player where you're listening right now. Hit subscribe on YouTube where you are there.
It definitely helps us out.
And it helps us tremendously and we really appreciate it.
I don't want YouTube collecting all those funds.
Oh my God, we can get some of that money.
Fuck that.